Today we're checking out Qatar Airways aboard their business class cabin in the Boeing 787 Dreamliner from Rome through to their home in Doha. I'll show you the highs and the lows as we explore a recent trip with one of the world's most famous carriers. It was just a short walk on that particular morning across to departures with thanks to an unplanned overnight stay in one of Rome's airport hotels. I'll fill you in a little bit more on that front slightly later. For now, there was a dedicated business class check-in desk. Check-in was wonderfully efficient and it wasn't long before I was through priority security into the general airport area. Okay, so that's check-in done. There are a couple of One World lounges just here. I've been assigned another lounge. We'll check that one out today so we get the full Qatar experience. I don't think it's one of their lounges, but let's hop along and check that one out. As I'm sure you're gathering by now, Rome's Terminal 3 is absolutely stunning. There was certainly a good smattering of lounges around, but as mentioned, I was headed for the Prima Vista on that particular morning, already with my Qatar Airways lounge invite. I do like the fact that they still do that. It's certainly really quite a nice touch. I didn't have long before the flight, which was just as well. Whilst the lounge was incredibly swanky and there were some really nice drinks and food selections, unfortunately it was incredibly busy, so I wasn't able to bring you any more footage than was available just here. Thankfully, it wasn't too long a walk at all to the gate and I was all ready to jump on board. So a second time lucky with Qatar Airways. Unfortunately, yesterday showed up a little bit late for the flight. The flight had about 10 minutes to run on the clock, but sadly they let it go. It was a late inbound flight with British Airways. It's just the way sometimes with these connections. Shame they couldn't have held it. It was a One World ticket, but that's just the way it goes, sadly, sometimes. Doesn't really come across massively in that clip, but frankly I'm still seething with British Airways with the events that have happened the day before. That, however, is all for another story in a later video, so for now let's jump aboard and check out the product on board this Dreamliner. The seats here still laid out in a 1-2-1 configuration. Best seats for couples, frankly guys, just sit across the aisle from each other. I think for me that will probably work the best. The seats itself are looking their age slightly, but it's still a really quite strong product even here in 2023. Awaiting passengers at their seats were the menus, a bottle of water and the lovely amenity kits that we will take a look at a little bit later into the flight. There was then also the small pillows provided, which you can also take away as a souvenir, which I think is a really nice touch. Despite the seat design being very much of the 2010s, it's still really quite functional and the storage is absolutely fantastic. So certainly for me, this still scores really quite highly. Just down to the side of the seat, you will find the entertainment headphones. We'll take more of a look into the entertainment system a little bit later, but this provided some additional storage space. There was then also a pull-out drawer, which was plenty big enough, for example, for my shoes, or perhaps a laptop or an iPad style of item. Overhead, there was then some lighting and also overhead air vents also provided. Qatar lead the world in terms of consistency of service, and it's never long after boarding before you're presented with that welcome drink and also refreshing towel. I had the crew come round and introduce themselves to me, and as ever with this airline, things were certainly off to a very good start. As we push back, quick reminder to those of you who are brand new to the channel to hit that subscribe button. I've got so much across the channel from Qatar Airways and many other airlines, and it would be great to have you on board with the rest of us. As for now, let's head for the runway and get over to Doha. I certainly loved every single minute of the departure on that particular day. It was such a gorgeous day, sadly, to be pushing back and departing out of Rome. There was a wonderful view up the Italian coastline, up towards the cruise port of Civitavecchia and beyond. We then turned back very quickly, heading back across Italy on our way towards Doha. So let's kick off the in-flight review with a look at the entertainment system. As ever, the headset was really nice quality, and you already know from the video where to find those. The seatback entertainment screen looked really good, nice and modern, crisp and quick to respond as ever. The content across Qatar Airways is absolutely superb. Quick note on the Wi-Fi, it was offered on this particular flight, but it was much more expensive and more limited to what you see aboard their more modern 777s, where you get unlimited browsing for the full flight for around $10. So a little bit more expensive, but it still at least had it. As for the bathrooms, these have got to be amongst some of the most interesting across the entire fleet. Having that big window to look out is really quite unique. As for some of the additional amenities, you can find some toothbrushes and some other lotions and potions in the bathroom as well. These were all really nicely maintained throughout the entire flight. I did this particular flight a little bit back to front in terms of my usual habits on daytime flights. I was absolutely exhausted from the previous 24 hours, so on that particular occasion it was time to make up the bed and get a couple of hours rest before the food. I promise, however, that will be following. As for the beds on the 787, these were immensely comfortable and it was a huge amount of room, certainly in terms of length. A little bit restrictive in terms of the knees, but otherwise really quite good. The biggest drawback of this particular seat design, however, is that it does kind of feel ever so slightly as though you are kind of lying out into the aisle. That said, overall, incredibly comfy and certainly had a couple of really good hours rest. On the food front, as ever with Qatar Airways, it was dine on demand, so I could make the absolute most of being able to order the flight schedule as how I wanted it on that particular day, so it was nice to take a couple of hours rest before then tucking into the lunch service. I wasn't too hungry on that particular day, but we will get through a couple of courses and we'll check those out in just a moment. Overall, on both the food and beverages front, a really nice selection across the board. One quick note from me, however, on the alcohol, there did seem to be a slight lessening in terms of the offering here from Qatar Airways. The passenger champagne comes in. I'm sure in the past that would have been Laurent Perrier. However, where it was most apparent was actually on the red wines. That 2015 flagship red wine just there, it was okay, but it certainly wasn't great. And the backup red wines, to be honest, were a little bit fresh off the vine. Elsewhere, there was a decent cocktail list, but that is perhaps something to be aware of. Being the av geek that I am, we do have the benefit of taking a quick look back through some of the archives. I pulled out a menu from a couple of years ago, so yes, you do have to adjust for the years in your mind, but particularly with this one, when you cross-check the ratings on the likes of Avino, it did show a little bit of a lessening. Not quite sure why they'd be looking to cost cut, particularly at the moment. Overall, the airlines are making more money than they ever really have in their history, so that did seem a little bit odd, and for the wine lovers amongst you, perhaps something just to keep an eye on. As ever from Qatar, the table was beautifully set and laid, and then it was then ready for the pasta to come along. Probably not one of the absolute best dishes. I paired it oddly with a glass of that flagship red wine, and overall, when it comes to a dining experience on a plane, it was still pretty amazing. I certainly, however, left the absolute best for last. This chocolate dessert was plated up absolutely incredibly and tasted every bit as good as it looked. Top marks to Qatar Airways on that particular front. I promised that we'd get back to the amenity kit and post the meal service. It was a good time to get this out on the table and give you a bit of a tour. There's a couple of different ones that they offer for both men and women. With this particular one, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that particular name. Qatar do like to mix up their amenity kits. Other carriers like British Airways have stuck with the same white company one for an awful number of years just now. Qatar, they like to mix things up. In terms of the amenity kit, it certainly had all the lotions and potions that you could ever desire on a flight. And remember, that was then also backed up with the toothbrushes in the bathroom as well. Now, most people on this particular flight opted to do things how I would usually do it in terms of lunch first and then a few hours rest perhaps before arriving at the final destination. So the cabin was very much set up for that. Just to the rear of this particular business class cabin, you do have this nice socializing area. The crew were keen to populate this with some additional snacks that you could just go and help yourself to at any time. That said, before long, we were looking to start making our descent into Doha, so some chocolates were supplied. This is a little signature of Qatar Airways. I've seen it on other flights before, and certainly went down very nicely indeed. There was then also another freshen up tower as we started to make our descent down into Doha. Having not flown with the airline in a premium cabin since November last year, it was great to be back on board to check in with them in mid-2023 to see how they're getting on. Overall, a really decent experience. They're still very much the airline we all know and love. The service aboard, as ever, was the standout, and the crew did a really fantastic job. Just a couple of small watch outs for me. One on the wine front, which we've already mentioned, and then the second piece was just around the slightly aging design and overall concept
of this 787 cabin. Ultimately, the 787s have been with us now for over 10 years, and it is starting to show across a number of airlines who would be really nice here to see how they plan to feature these cabins as part of their updated business class designs. We will ultimately get the Q Suite 2.0 in the coming years, however that is more likely to feature on the slightly wider 777 initially. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching the video. I'm very much looking forward to welcoming you to one real soon.